If you had told me back in high school that one day I would be the one holding the power over the person who made my teenage years miserable, I never would have believed you. But life has a strange way of turning tables. My name is Alyssa Morgan, and my story begins in a small town where everyone knew each other's business and reputations were built or destroyed before you even had a chance to define yourself. I wasn't one of the popular kids, not even close. I was quiet, shy, and far more interested in books and parties, which made me an easy target for people who thrived on tearing others down. The worst of them all was Derek Collins. Derek was the golden boy of our school. He was the quarterback of the football team, the teacher's favorite, and the kind of guy who could charm his way out of almost anything. To everyone else, he was untouchable, but to me, he was a nightmare. From the moment we entered freshman year until the day we graduated, Derek made my life a living hell. He mocked the way I dressed, called me names in the hallway, and spread rumors that left me humiliated. One time, in front of the entire cafeteria, he dumped a tray of spaghetti all over me and laughed while I sat there frozen, the sound of everyone else joining and echoing in my ears. Teachers turned a blind eye, classmates either laughed or looked away, and no one ever came to my defense. It left me feeling small, invisible, powerless. When graduation finally came, I thought I was free, that I would never have to see Derek again, and that I could leave all that pain behind. I went to college determined to reinvent myself, and for a while it worked. I threw myself into my studies, pushed myself harder than I ever thought possible, and eventually earned my MBA. I wasn't the scared, bookish girl Derek once bullied. I was ambitious, driven, and hungry for success. The years passed, and I climbed the corporate ladder step by step, sacrificing sleep, relationships, and weekends to prove that I belonged in boardrooms instead of being shoved into lockers. By the time I was 30, I was a regional manager for a rapidly growing retail chain. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I had an office overlooking downtown, a team that answered to me, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control. Then one Monday morning, HR forwarded me the sum of a new hire they wanted me to approve, and my world tilted. I opened the file casually, sipping my coffee, and nearly dropped the mug when I saw the name. Derek Collins. At first, I thought it had to be a coincidence. Surely there were dozens of Derek Collins in the world, right? But as I read further, my stomach twisted. The sum listed our high school, our hometown, the timeline that matched perfectly. It was him. The boy who had tormented me, the one I had spent years trying to forget, was applying to work under me. I sat there staring at the screen, emotions swirling: anger, shock, confusion, even a strange flicker of curiosity. I could have rejected the application right then. It would have been easy, and no one would have questioned it. But something inside me stopped. Maybe it was the part of me that still wanted answers. Maybe it was the part of me that wanted to look him in the eye after all these years and see if he remembered what he had done to me. Whatever it was, I signed off on his hire, not out of kindness, but because I needed to face him. The day of orientation came, and when Derek walked into the room, my heart slammed against my ribs like I was 17 again. He looked older, of course, but still unmistakably him: the sharp jawline, the broad shoulders, the easy stride. But there was something else too. The cocky grin he once wore everywhere was gone. His eyes looked tired, worn down by life in a way I hadn't expected. When I introduced myself as his regional manager, the flicker of recognition in his eyes was undeniable. His face froze for a split second before he masked it, but I caught it. He remembered me. Alyssa Morgan, I said, extending my hand with a professional smile that carried no warmth. Welcome aboard. He hesitated before taking it. Yeah, thanks. Didn't expect to see a familiar face here. I held his gaze. Neither did I. The rest of the day passed without incident. But my mind was a storm. He was polite, subdued even, and nothing like the arrogant boy who had once taken so much joy in my misery. But people don't just change overnight. Could Derek really have grown up? Or was this just another act? That night, lying awake in my apartment, the memories came flooding back: every cruel laugh, every rumor, every shove into lockers. I had thought I buried those scars, but now they itched like open wounds. And now, fate had delivered him to my doorstep, only this time the roles were reversed. He was under my authority, under my control. I told myself I would keep things professional, that I wouldn't let old wounds dictate my decisions. But the truth was, I felt something I hadn't expected, the intoxicating weight of power. For once, I was the one who could make his life easy or miserable. I could give him opportunities or strip them away. For years, he had controlled how I felt about myself, and now I finally had the chance to flip the script. Yet beneath that thrill was something I didn't want to admit: curiosity. What had happened to Derek Collins? What had turned the golden boy into a man applying for a mid-level retail job? Why did his eyes look so heavy, like he was carrying the world on his shoulders? I didn't know it then, but hiring Derek Collins would set off a chain of events I never could have predicted. He wasn't just a ghost from my past. He was a storm waiting to unravel not only his secrets, but mine as well. And it all began with the one thing I thought I'd never hear from him: an apology. When Derek finally apologized, it didn't happen the way I thought it would. And it didn't make me feel the way I expected either. It was about 2 weeks after he started working under me, and by then I had spent every single day analyzing him, watching the way he interacted with the staff, testing his responses to pressure. He worked harder than I expected, took on extra shifts without complaint, and treated his coworkers with respect. The same mouth that once hurled cruel jokes at me now gave out encouragement and polite thank yous. But I didn't trust it. I told myself it had to be an act, some calculated way of climbing back up, because the Derek Collins I knew was incapable of kindness. Still, the words rattled in my head. What if he changed? Could people like him really change? That day, we were both working late, the store quiet after everyone else had gone home. I was in my office going through quarterly reports when I heard a soft knock. "Come in," I said, and the door opened to reveal Derek. He looked nervous in a way I had never seen before, shifting his weight, avoiding my eyes. "Do you have a minute?" he asked, his voice low. I gestured for him to sit, though every part of me was tense. He sat down, rubbed his hands over his face, and finally looked at me. "I need to say something." My heart pounded because I knew what was coming. And still, hearing it shook me. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough, raw in a way that didn't sound rehearsed. "For everything I did to you in high school. I was a complete jerk. No, I was worse than that. I was cruel. I hurt you for no reason other than to make myself feel bigger. And I've hated myself for it for years." I just stared at him, stunned, the air heavy between us. Part of me had dreamed of this moment for so long, but now that it was here, it felt off, not satisfying, not victorious. Instead, it made my chest ache in ways I didn't expect. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. He exhaled, slumping in the chair. "Because I see you now successful, respected, powerful, and I can't stop thinking about how unfair it was that I ever tried to make you feel like you were less." "You were never less, Alyssa. It was me. I was the one who was scared and insecure, and I took it out on you because you were smart and I didn't know how to handle that." His honesty hit me like a punch. I wanted to cling to my anger, to remind him of the countless nights I cried myself to sleep because of him, but I also saw the man in front of me, haunted by something that went deeper than regret. He wasn't just apologizing for me. He was apologizing to himself. I folded my arms, choosing my words carefully. "You can't undo what you did, Derek. You can't erase those years." His eyes darkened, and he nodded. "I know, and I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to hear me say it. Needed you to know that I'm not proud of who I was." For a long moment, silence stretched between us. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt like I had finally won. Instead, I felt conflicted, because beneath the remorse in his voice, I sensed something else, a shadow of guilt that didn't quite match the crime. And that unsettled me. After he left my office, I sat there replaying every detail. The way his hands trembled. The way his eyes flicked toward the window like he was hiding something heavier than high school bullying. The apology was real, I could feel it, but it was also incomplete, like a door cracked open just enough to show there was more behind it. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next week, I noticed little things that only fed my suspicion. Derek never talked about his life outside of work. Most of the staff chatted about families, girlfriends, hobbies, but Derek kept his answers vague. When someone asked if he still played football, his jaw tightened before he changed the subject. When another asked if he ever went back to our hometown, he laughed it off too quickly, his eyes darting away. The cracks were there if you knew where to look. And I was looking. One night, after closing, I walked past the break room and overheard him on the phone. His voice was low, urgent. Nothing like the calm tone he used around the team. "No, I can't, don't call me here. I told you I'd figure it out. Just stop bringing it up." I froze outside the door, straining to hear, but then the line went dead and silence filled the room. When he came out moments later, he flinched at the sight of me. "Everything okay?" I asked casually, though my pulse was racing. "Yeah, just wrong number," he muttered, brushing past me. He didn't meet my eyes. I should have let it go. It wasn't my business. But something inside me, something sharpened by years of his torment, wanted to dig deeper. Part of it was curiosity, sure, but part of it was revenge too. For so long, he had held the upper hand, and now I finally had the leverage. If he had secrets, I wanted to know them. I wanted to hold them over him the way he once held power over me. But what I didn't realize was that his secrets weren't small, petty things from the past. They were dangerous, and by chasing them, I was walking straight into a storm. It started small, with whispers from HR about why Derek's last job ended abruptly. On paper, it said personal reasons, but one of the managers hinted that money had gone missing. Then I noticed him staying late, hovering near the registers and the safe when no one was looking. And then came the night I found a folded piece of paper on my desk. No name, no explanation, just 5 words scrawled in rushed handwriting. "Don't trust him. He's hiding more than you think." My hands shook as I read it. I looked around the office, the shadows stretching long across the floor, and realized that whatever game had begun between Derek and me, it was only getting darker when I took over as team lead. I thought the hardest part would be managing deadlines, balancing responsibilities, and learning how to communicate with upper management while also supporting the people under me. But I was wrong, because the hardest part was dealing with someone who seemed to think the past gave him a permanent upper hand over me. And that someone was Derek, the same Derek who used to knock my books into puddles, spread rumors about me dating teachers, and call me worthless every day in high school. And now he had the audacity to sit in meetings I led, roll his eyes, whisper to colleagues, and even undermine me by suggesting better approaches right after I finished presenting mine. But here's the twist. Management trusted me, not him. So while he was busy being condescending, they gave me authority to approve budgets, make staffing decisions, and control timelines, which meant that no matter how loudly he complained, his voice had less weight than mine, and that should have been enough to shut him down. But Derek wasn't one to accept losing, especially not to me. The kid he once turned into a punchline for years, so he started playing dirtier. Things like accidentally leaving me off important email threads, misplacing reports I needed for meetings, and even telling a client that I wasn't prepared when in fact he had withheld key data from me. And when I called him out, he laughed in my face like it was high school all over again. But what he didn't realize was that I had grown a backbone. And this time there wasn't a principal telling me to just ignore it. There was a corporate policy and HR team watching everything. And I knew how to document, so I kept records of every missing email, every instance of sabotage, and every passive-aggressive comment. And while doing that, I also kept my composure, because losing my cool would only make me look unprofessional, but staying calm and factual, that made me look like the responsible one. And it burned him up inside, I could tell, because the more I stayed calm, the more reckless he became. Like one day when I sent him to deliver an update to the client, and instead of following instructions, he changed key details to make himself look smarter, which almost tanked the whole deal. And when the client called furious, Derek tried to shift the blame on me, saying I hadn't explained it properly, but I was ready. I had the original document saved, time-stamped, and I forwarded it straight to the client with an apology and reassurance that we'd handle it. And the client believed me because my version matched their notes. And that's when I saw Derek's face fall in a way that reminded me of when teachers caught him cheating in class. Only this time, the stakes were higher, because his credibility wasn't just bruised, it was publicly shredded, and even my boss, Mr. Carter, asked me privately if Derek was worth keeping on the team. But I wasn't going to be the one to say yes or no just yet, because a part of me wanted him to dig his own grave, and he was doing a great job at it, faster than I ever could have pushed. But while Derek's professional downfall was satisfying, I can't pretend it was easy on me emotionally, because every time he smirked across the table, I heard echoes of high school hallways. Every time he whispered rookie mistake under his breath, I felt that old shame in my stomach, and I had to fight the urge to shrink back into the kid I once was. So I reminded myself that the power dynamics had shifted. I wasn't the kid holding a tray in the cafeteria hoping not to trip. I was his boss now, and no matter how much he tried to make me forget it, I had control. So when he came into my office one evening, after everyone had left, closing the door behind him, and said, "You think you've won, don't you, Neil?" I didn't flinch. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "No, Derek, I don't think I've won. I think I've worked hard to earn this, something you never learned how to do." And the silence that followed was heavier than any insult he ever threw at me, because he had no comeback, and he just muttered, "We'll see," before storming out. But what I didn't know was that "we'll see" wasn't just him being dramatic. It was a promise, because the very next week, my boss informed me that Derek had gone to upper management, filing a complaint that I was abusing my authority and targeting him unfairly. And for a moment my heart sank, because I knew how these things could be twisted, how easily bullies make themselves look like victims. But once again, I had documentation, months' worth of emails, records, and witnesses who had seen him undermine me. So when HR called me in for questioning, I calmly presented everything, every fact, every proof, and I watched as Derek's carefully crafted story unraveled, leaving him exposed. And when HR asked him to explain why he had changed client reports without approval, he stuttered. When they asked why he left me off email chains, he shrugged. And when they asked if he had been openly disrespectful in meetings, he tried to deny it. But then 3 coworkers spoke up and confirmed my version. And in that moment, for the first time in my life, Derek wasn't the one in control of the narrative. I was. And the look on his face when HR suspended him pending further review was priceless. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over, because Derek wasn't the type to give up after losing once. And I had the sinking feeling that he had more tricks left. Only this time, it wasn't just about me being his boss. It was about him refusing to let go of the identity he built for himself back in high school, the one where he was on top and I was beneath him, and watching that identity crumble was turning him desperate. And desperate people are dangerous, so I braced myself, because if he thought the first 3 rounds were tough, he had no idea how far I was willing to go to finally break free from his grip once and for all. Derek's suspension should have been the end of it. The clean break where I could finally breathe without looking over my shoulder. But it wasn't, because even while he was out of the office, I felt his presence lingering like a shadow I couldn't shake. Whispers in the break room about how unfair it was. Side eyes from a couple of people who clearly still thought of him as the golden boy. And the subtle feeling that he was working behind the scenes to stir up doubt about me. And that suspicion turned out to be true when one morning, I opened my inbox to find an anonymous email accusing me of manipulating reports, stealing credit for team projects, and intimidating employees. And while it was obvious to me who sent it, HR had to treat it seriously. So once again I was under investigation. And once again I had to produce evidence. And while I could prove every accusation wrong, the process drained me. The endless meetings, the polite but skeptical questions, the constant need to defend myself when I was the one being wronged. But I refused to crumble, because I knew that if I gave Derek even the slightest crack, he would force his way in. So I doubled down on being professional, delivering my projects ahead of schedule, supporting my team, and documenting every move. But then came the twist I hadn't expected. Derek wasn't working alone anymore. He had managed to rope in one of my own team members, a guy named Vince, someone I thought was neutral, who suddenly began echoing Derek's complaints, saying I was too harsh in my management style, that I didn't listen enough, and it was like déjà vu, two voices instead of one trying to paint me as the villain. And for a moment, it almost worked, because people love a good underdog story. And Derek was selling himself as the poor employee being crushed by a power-hungry boss. But what he didn't realize was that while he was busy scheming, I was quietly building alliances, people who saw the truth of how I handled things. And one of those allies turned out to be someone unexpected. Mr. Carter, my boss, who called me into his office and said, "Neil, I don't know what Derek's game is, but I've been watching you closely, and I see the difference between leadership and sabotage." And hearing that was like a weight lifting off my chest, because it meant that no matter what Derek tried to pull, at least someone with real authority saw me for who I was. But Derek wasn't done, and his next move was darker than anything before, because suddenly personal details about me started floating around the office. Things I had never shared at work, like the fact that my mom had been in and out of jobs when I was in high school, or that I used to walk 2 miles to school because we couldn't afford a car. And it didn't take a genius to realize that Derek was digging into my past, pulling out pieces of my life to humiliate me all over again, just like he used to in the cafeteria. And the rage that boiled inside me was almost unbearable. But I swallowed it, because exploding would give him exactly what he wanted. So instead, I turned it into resolve, and I started researching, pulling every file, every record, every shred of evidence I could gather, not just to defend myself, but to expose Derek for who he really was. And that's when I found something shocking, something that flipped the power dynamic completely. Because buried in the project logs and archived emails, I discovered that Derek had been cutting corners on his own work long before I became his boss, altering numbers to make his results look better, and not just once or twice, but repeatedly, in ways that could have serious consequences if clients ever found out. And I realized that this wasn't just petty sabotage anymore. This was fraud, and suddenly, I wasn't just a victim of a bully. I was holding a weapon that could end his career permanently. But the question was whether to use it, because as much as I wanted revenge, I also knew that dropping that bomb would set off a chain reaction I couldn't control. And part of me wondered if I was ready for that kind of responsibility. But then Derek forced my hand, because the next week, he returned from suspension, not contrite, not humbled, but louder than ever, smirking at me in meetings, whispering to Vince, even making a snide remark in front of the entire team about how some people only get promoted because they kiss up, not because they have talent. And in that moment, I realized he was never going to stop. Not until I made him stop. So I set the plan in motion, carefully, strategically, waiting for the right moment. And that moment came when Derek presented his quarterly report to the executive team, full of numbers that looked too good to be true, because they were. And I sat there, calm and collected, as he strutted through his slides, until the CFO asked a question about a specific figure, and Derek fumbled, giving an answer that didn't line up with the data I had. So I raised my hand and said, "Actually, I'd like to clarify something." And then, with everyone watching, I presented the archived reports, the inconsistencies, the proof that Derek had been falsifying results for months. And the room went silent, all eyes shifting from me to him, his face turning pale, his voice stammering. And for the first time, the power shifted completely, because he wasn't just embarrassing me anymore. He was embarrassing himself, and not in front of classmates or teachers, but in front of the very people who controlled his paycheck, his reputation, his future. And when the CFO asked him point blank if he could explain the discrepancies, he had nothing, just silence. And that silence spoke louder than any insult he had ever thrown my way. And I knew in that moment that I had finally turned the tables. But even as satisfaction surged through me, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that this wasn't the end. Because someone like Derek didn't go down quietly. And if I thought he was desperate before, I hadn't seen anything yet. Because now I had cornered him, stripped away the mask. And people like him, when cornered, tend to lash out in ways that are unpredictable and dangerous. And I had no idea just how far he was willing to go to keep from losing everything he thought he was entitled to after Derek's fraudulent numbers were exposed in front of the executive team. He was suspended again, this time with the clear message that termination was on the table. But if I thought that was the moment where I could relax, I was wrong, because Derek wasn't going down quietly. He had built too much of his identity on being untouchable, on being the one who humiliated others, not the one who got humiliated. And so even as HR launched a full investigation into his doctored reports, I started noticing strange things happening around me. Like files disappearing from my office, documents being shuffled or misplaced, or confidential information somehow slipping out into conversations where it shouldn't have been. And I knew it had to be him, sneaking back into the building somehow or getting help from Vince, the teammate who had been parroting his lies, and the paranoia of it all was eating at me. I was working late nights, double-checking locks, sending myself copies of everything to make sure nothing could be tampered with. And every time I saw Derek's name in an email chain or Vince whispering in the corner, my stomach tightened, because I could feel the storm building, the final blow he was planning. And then it came, not in the form of another email or sabotage, but in something far more dangerous. Because one Friday morning I was called into a meeting with HR and legal, and sitting across from me was Derek, smug again, smirking like he had won. And he slid a file across the table full of documents, doctored to look like I had been altering my own numbers to make myself look better, and for a second, my blood ran cold. Because the pages looked real, convincing, almost identical to my own reports, and I realized in horror that he was trying to frame me, to flip the narrative and destroy me before I destroyed him. But what he didn't count on was how meticulous I had become. How every report I had ever submitted was backed up, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. And so when HR asked me to explain, I didn't panic. I calmly pulled up the originals on my laptop, showed them the metadata, the timestamps, the email chains where I had submitted them, and then I asked them to check the file Derek had provided, because if they looked closely enough, they'd see the edits, the mismatched fonts, the inconsistencies that revealed it wasn't mine at all. And sure enough, within minutes, ID confirmed that the file had been altered on Derek's own account. And the smug grin drained from his face like color from a dying flame. And in that moment, the room shifted, the balance of power permanently tipping, because there was no coming back from this. Not even for him. And HR didn't just suspend him this time, they terminated him on the spot, escorted him out of the building while the rest of the office watched. And for the first time since high school, I saw Derek with no mask, no armor, just a defeated man with nothing left to cling to. And I thought that would feel like victory, pure and sweet. But it didn't. Not completely. Because as much as he had hurt me, as much as he had tried to ruin me, watching him lose everything felt less like triumph and more like closure. Like finally cutting the last tie that bound me to the scared teenager I used to be. And after he was gone, things slowly returned to normal. The whispers faded. Vince quietly transferred to another department, and I found myself leading my team without the constant shadow of Derek looming over me. And that's when it hit me: the real win wasn't just being his boss, or exposing his lies, or surviving his schemes. The real win was realizing that I had finally broken free from his grip, that his words no longer defined me, that his power over me was gone. And I was stronger not because I beat him at his own game, but because I refused to become him, because in every moment where I could have lashed out, humiliated him the way he humiliated me, I chose professionalism, patience, and integrity. And in the end, that was what saved me. That was what set me apart. And even though Derek tried to drag me back into the role of his victim, I walked away as something he could never touch again, his equal turned superior, not just in title, but in strength. And the last twist came months later when I ran into him by accident at a coffee shop across town. He looked smaller somehow, thinner, tired, carrying boxes in the back for a manager who didn't even acknowledge him. And when his eyes met mine, I expected anger, resentment, maybe even another smirk, but instead, I saw defeat, resignation, and maybe even regret, and he muttered, "Guess you won after all," but I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I just said, "No, Derek. I didn't win." I moved on. And I walked out, feeling lighter than I ever had, because that was the truth. It was never about beating him. It was about breaking free. And I finally had, leaving him behind in the past where he belonged.